We're beginning Iggeres Hakodesh. This is the Alter Rebbe's letters. The Alter Rebbe, in general, was an incredibly precise person. It's very obvious from everything we know about his life that he never did anything that was less than exact. He was obsessive, unbelievable. I suppose the word that more ideally or more sensitively articulates this was that the Rebbe was a man of emes. His whole life was a pursuit of the truth. And as a consequence, this truth is found in every single aspect of his life. Even the Alter Rebbe's speech was different. The Alter Rebbe didn't talk. He used to sing. It's a tradition from Chassidim. I heard the Rebbe many times imitate that tone, or a number of times. Everything the Alter Rebbe said was music. He would, even a hello was a nigun. Everything about his person was very intense and very focused and very precise. He was also a man of incredible genius and creativity. Alter Rebbe was, there's almost nothing that in Yiddishkeit that Alter Rebbe didn't re-examine and, if necessary, modify. He's an incredibly accomplished human being, unbelievably, in a rare way, an incredibly accomplished man in all areas of Yiddishkeit. And everything he did was perfect, exact. To him, this was obsessive. One of the strong critics of the Alter Rebbe was a Jew by the name of the Baruch Mezhebush. The Baruch of Mezhebush was the Baal Shem Tov's grandson. The Baruch Mezhebush was very, very outspokenly against the Alter Rebbe, and he felt that the Alter Rebbe was wrong in revealing Hasidus Chabad, and he made no secret of it. So the holy Baditchev, Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchev, who was a friend of both of theirs, he was a friend of the Baruch Mezhebush and a friend of the Alter Rebbe's, said to the Baruch Mezhebush about the Alter Rebbe, I heard him read the Torah. Alter Rebbe leined himself, he would read the Torah himself. He was completely in heaven, and he didn't make the slightest error on earth. In other words, when he was reading the Torah, he was spiritually totally another realm, but the reading was perfect. Both the words and the music and the grammar. This is the Alter Rebbe. Everything he did was very, very precise. Absolutely precise. And one of the most well-known examples of this precision is the Alter Rebbe's writings, because this we have. In other words, Alter Rebbe's music is hearsay. You hear about it from people. The Alter Rebbe's personal life and how it manifested this kind of perfection, you hear about from people. But the Rebbe's writings are published for the most part, and we're finding more and more of it as time passes. I mentioned this to you once before, that they recently found in the last 2 decades pages and pages and pages and pages of writing of the Alter Rebbe in his original hand in Russian files. The Russians, it's a utopia. The one thing they don't possess is paper shredders, and thank God for that, or for that matter, garbage cans. They have 400-year-old notes of meaningless trials. But they found in the Alter Rebbe, in the Russian archives, more original handwriting of the Alter Rebbe than was known to exist on the planet. And it was published. Copies of it were printed. And his writing has an incredible precision. The writing of the Rebbe is very measured. The Rebbe's terminology in indicating and describing the style of writing of the Alter Rebbe is L'shoinei Hazohov, his golden pen, his golden writing. Gold, for those who are not aware, is an allusion to Yira. Kesef, silver, is an allusion to Ava, which means love. And gold, which is more red, is an allusion to Yira, awe, fear, judgment, exactitude. And without a question, in the Alter Rebbe's person, that was a center. And his writings are very precise. His Shulchan Aruch is extraordinary. His Tanya is, from a grammatical point of view alone, it's an unbelievable piece of work. And the same is true of everything, all of his writings. What is interesting is that for the most part, he did not write his own Hasidus. He wrote the Tanya and almost nothing else. Towards the end of his life, his recitation of Hasidus, his speeches of Hasidus became incredibly prolific. Sometimes 3 or 4 times in a week, and on a special occasion, many more times than that. But he didn't write, he only spoke. And part of the reason the Alter Rebbe only spoke and didn't write is because when the Alter Rebbe spoke Chassidus, he was in another plane. He was someplace else. I mean, we know stories of the Alter Rebbe saying a maimer, saying a discourse, and then asking for the notes, for the transcript of the maimer, and saying, hey, that's pretty good maimer, pretty good job. It was his own discourse. He had just recited, someone had written down, and he was impressed with himself. Because sometimes Alter Rebbe didn't even know what he was saying. He was someplace else altogether. The result of this is the original writings of the Alter Rebbe in Hasidus are actually few and far between. There's not that many of them. But they conform to this measure of exactitude which defines his whole character. The writing is very precise. Every word is measured, every letter is measured, and there's also an incredible amount of grammatical precision, in addition to all the other aspects of exactness which define him as a person. When the Alter Rebbe passed away, his children began to collect his original writings. If they can get his original hand, they got it. Otherwise, they wanted copies. Because they understood that when it comes to Hasidic writings, the actual writings of the Alter Rebbe in Hasidus were very few. There's hundreds, there's thousands of spoken discourses, but a handful of written ones. A very, very small number of written discourses. A very, very small quantity of these discourses appear in a sefer called Torah Oir, which is a commentary of Hasidus based on the Parshes, which was printed by the Tzemach Tzedek, by the third Lubavitcher Rebbe in the 1830s. The rest of them, the ones that we have, or the ones that they had, were published in an expanded Tanya that was printed after the Alter Rebbe passed away. This means the following. The original Tanya was a much smaller book than the Tanya we have today. It had only two parts. The first part of the Tanya is what's called the Book of Intermediates, Sefer Shel Beinanim, which is the practical, the applied part of Hasidus. It teaches a person how to serve the Eibishter. The second part of the Tanya, which is called the Shari Yichud V'Emunah, the essay on unity, is a philosophical or a mystical treatise, which gives the intellectual side of Hasidus. And that was the Tanya. The original Tanya had only two sections. The first section, the larger section, teaches you how to live as a Chassid. The first section, which is the shorter section, teaches you the philosophy of Hasidus. And that was it. About 10 years after the publishing of the original Tanya, the Alter Rebbe added the third section of the Tanya, which we just completed, which is his treatise on Tshuva, completing the Tanya that was published during his lifetime. So the Tanya then became a book with three sections. Section A is teaching people how to be Beinanim, servants of God, to be in control of themselves. The second section was the philosophy of Hasidus. And the third section is what happens if you're not perfect. How do you do tshuva and compensate for the imperfection? That was the Tanya. When he passed away, his children began to collect his writings, his original writings, that means what he wrote himself. And in 1814, they published an expanded Tanya, which is the Tanya we have. Instead of the 3-section Tanya, they published a 5-section Tanya. And these 5 sections are the original 3 plus letters, section 4, and notes, which is section 5. Letters of the Alter Rebbe are writings of Hasidus and Kabbalah in some cases that the Alter Rebbe wrote for various different occasions, for various different people, for various different circumstances. The notes are for the most part what the Alter Rebbe wrote as he himself was preparing the Tanya. It's indicated, it's understood from the introduction of the Alter Rebbe's children that when the Alter Rebbe was writing the Tanya, he was doing some deep, if you will, Kabbalistic research. And within the framework of that research, he wrote notes. These notes are printed along with the Tanya in section 5, which is called Kuntes Vachen, I feel an afterthought. We are now, with the help of God, and we have a lot to thank the Eibishter for, embarking on section 4. We finished section 3, we finished Iggeres Tshuva, for whatever it's worth, for better or for worse, and we're moving on to the Alter Rebbe's letters. There's a few points need to be made. Number one of the things about the Alter Rebbe's letters, which is both good and bad, is that you don't have to keep track from week to week about what's flying. Every letter is independent. They're separate, they're isolated topics. There, of course, are a lot of related topics, a lot of interrelated discussions from one letter to the next, but they were written as self-contained essays. They were actually letters. Alter Rebbe would write a letter, sometimes with a very practical pitch, a very practical intent. But instead of simply saying, please do this or that and the other thing, he would include a mystical note or thought or philosophical expounding to enrich his message or to encourage his command, if you will. And in this book, they published only the philosophical and mystical parts. Many of these letters are incomplete. They took out the beginnings and the ends of the letters because the technical parts, like, hello Shmedel, please, visit Betel and send them my regards. And regards in Kabbalah means, that kind of thing. So the beginnings and ends were cut away, and just the scholarly parts of the Alter Rebbe's letters were incorporated into the Tanya. And since the Tanya was published, they found additional letters from the Alter Rebbe, but the vast majority of writings that the Alter Rebbe personally wrote with his own hand in Hasidus are compiled in the Tanya. Another thing which is quite significant is that as we read this Iggeres Hakodesh, what is going to become amply clear to us is the Alter Rebbe was obsessive about the mitzvah of tzedakah. It consumed him. You'll see, tzedakah comes up again and again and again. At least half of the letters were written about questions of giving tzedakah. Now the story behind it on a technical level is that the Alter Rebbe was a gabbai tzedakah. Alter Rebbe was an overseer of a certain fund for which he needed to raise significant amounts of monies, and he was encouraging his Hasidim to give tzedakah. Because at that time, a delegation, a representation of Hasidim, especially from Russia, had moved to Israel, and for whatever reasons they found themselves completely financially dependent upon their brethren in Eastern Europe, and as a consequence, the Alter Rebbe and many other Hasidic Rebbes would send them money. This was what we call today Koilel Chabad, which is a tzedakah that actually still exists. It's well over 200 years old. But there's a much deeper reason. The deeper reason is because the Alter Rebbe felt that tzedakah is the answer to all of our spiritual problems. Tshuva, tefillah, the answer to all of our dilemmas is to give tzedakah. And the thing that's very important to indicate as we talked about this is the Alter Rebbe was not telling other people to give tzedakah. Alter Rebbe practiced, and afterwards he preached. As a young man, the Alter Rebbe was obsessed with the idea of giving tzedakah. Before he was ever a chassid, before he ever met the Mizitcher Maggid. He was 15 years old, or almost 15 years old when he got married. I told this story to you on a previous occasion. His wife was the daughter of the richest Jew in all of the state of Vitebsk, where the Alter Rebbe lived. He was very wealthy. Alter Rebbe was given 5,000 ruble as a dowry. It's like giving a kid of 14 and a half, 15 years old, $5 million in cash, no strings attached. And the Alter Rebbe discussed with his wife-to-be and with his father-in-law terms. And the engagement was conditional on these terms. The terms were, he spoke over to his father-in-law, you will not interfere with how I handle my money, which he agreed to. And with his Kala he discussed, she was probably also around 14 or 15, that they're giving the whole thing away. They took the 5,000 rubles, every penny of it, divided it up into smaller parcels, and they gave it out as loans to help people with parnasa. Which is incredible because this was part of the MO of the Baal Shem Tov, part of the method of the Alter Rebbe. Baal Shem Tov's creativity was the idea that if you want to help Jewish people spiritually, you have to first help them physically and financially. Alter Rebbe, who never heard of the Baal Shem Tov, was doing exactly the same thing. He knew intuitively this was right. The bottom line is that when he needed the money, not a dime was left. And the Alter Rebbe and his wife, she came from a very wealthy home. The Alter Rebbe also grew up in a very comfortable home financially, lived their lives in poverty. Because the Alter Rebbe felt that, like I told you in the beginning, Judaism is about emes, truth. And truth means serving God without any hesitation, without any self-centeredness. And to him, the Alter Rebbe said, in today's day and age, and we're not that holy, we can't study Torah on the highest levels, we can't pray with deepest intensities, the answer to all of our problems is tzedakah. And he practiced it, and then he preached it. Part of his model as a Hasidic Rebbe was to encourage his Hasidim to give extraordinary amounts of tzedakah. In fact, it's interesting to know that when he was a young man, he was 15 years old, but he was, of course, an incredible genius, people gathered around him to learn from him. And he had a following. But he made a condition with all the young men who came to study under him, that they had to take their entire dowry and do the same thing he did. Give it away as free loans. What people in that situation did was they got this huge amount of money, this dowry. They didn't need it because they were being supported by their in-laws. They would invest it in a silent partnership, and when they needed the money 10, 15 years later to start a business, the money had multiplied. To take that money and give it away to free loans, even if you get it back, is a very bad business plan. And Alter Rebbe said, take your dowry, give it away as free loans, or else I won't teach you. And if they didn't want to do it in its entirety, the Alter Rebbe wouldn't teach them, and he managed to have a considerable following in spite of that, which tells you what kind of time it was, what kind of era it was. And many of these letters talk about the incredible power of tzedakah, how much it heals and helps and benefits us, and it really is at the heart of the Iggeres Hakodesh. In addition, there are going to be quite a few discussions about prayer, about davening, as we will in this particular letter that we're starting this evening, because Hasidus really is about meeting God. Hasidus really is about personalizing God. Hasidus really is about, not just being frum and learned, but sensitive to the presence of Hashem. And one of the great Hasidim used to say, you meet God during prayer. And in Hasidus, therefore, davening was incredibly important, and there were quite a few letters that deal with prayer. There are all kinds of letters deal with Torah, other things, and there's letters of strict Kabbalah, which will cause us to dig a little deeper, both from my end and from your end, and with the help of God, we're going to go through this one letter at a time, 1 week at a time, with Hashem Yisbarach, with the help of God Almighty. So that's essentially the introduction to this Iggeres Hakodesh. So we are now going to begin a series of lectures where almost every week we're going to be starting a new topic. And you will see as we journey through this, the topic which dominates the discussion will be tzedakah, but there'll be plenty of other things as well.